Hi friends, you're in for a powerful conversation today. My guest is Stuart Sandeman, renowned breath coach, author of Breathe In, Breathe Out, and founder of BreathPod. If you've ever wondered how breathwork can go beyond just calming your nerves and actually help you process trauma, shift limiting beliefs, and change your state at will, this episode is for you. We talk about the science of breathing, how emotional patterns are held in the body, and why changing your breath can quite literally rewrite the manual you've been unconsciously living by. Stuart also shares his deeply personal journey through grief and how breathwork became his path to healing. This conversation is really practical. You'll get lots of takeaways that you can start using straight away, and it's super inspiring. So enjoy. Stuart, so great to have you here today. I've been looking forward to this one. Welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. I think one of the best places to start, it was funny because when I was looking through some of your answers actually, and you were saying that one of your favorite books is The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by
Yes.
Joseph Murphy, also one of mine. And I think this is almost like a good place to begin actually, because as we go through life, we accumulate things that happen to us, some of them traumatic experiences. And I think that there's a lot of talk around we develop certain beliefs in early childhood and we have these patternings and they can be hard to move away from. And I think that's true. But then there's also just life events that happen that can turn us on a different path. And when something goes wrong, we can naturally be fearful of taking risk, or we can start to ingrain new beliefs that maybe don't serve us as well. And we can also go through traumatic things that happen to us that get stored in the body and that can be really hard to release. If you're open to it, because I know it's a pretty emotional path that you came into this, losing your girlfriend in such a way, that must for you have also created a degree of trauma in your body. And what I found is that trauma can kind of get stored. And you speak about how the breath can be one way to release this. Can you describe a little bit more about that for our listeners, and how, because I know everyone will have something, right? There's a saying, isn't there, that everyone you speak to will have a story that will break your heart. All of us have been through something to a lesser or greater degree. And I think many people are unaware of how that can manifest in our body and create kind of some kind of holding pattern for us. I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit more about your story and your journey and on that.
No, thanks for a great place to start. And it's exactly that. We hold so much tension, and how we hold that tension is by holding our breath. And our breath contracts, the muscles in our breathing cycle contract to stop the natural flow of emotion. So I went through a life experience, and we all go through these different felt experiences through grief. At a relatively young age, my girlfriend was diagnosed with terminal cancer and sadly passed away 18 months later. And that put me in a really bad headspace, as you can imagine. But jumping forward from that, so that was a traumatic experience. You say, where was that held in my body? Well, for me, it was held in my chest. A lot of people hold grief in their lungs. Chinese medicine say that grief is held in the lungs. So my upper thoracic completely collapsed, which is my heart space. If you imagine your chest muscles, which are secondary intercostal muscles, just weren't being used. But I was still breathing very diaphragmatically. So in a sort of normal sense, I was breathing fine. But when we start looking a little bit deeper, my breath had been contracted to protect myself from feeling. Because the natural cycle of emotion happens when something triggers us, that's maybe out of value, out of alignment with our values. Something triggers us in our environment or through thoughts, and then it triggers a response. We have a chemical response in our body, and our breath pattern moves. So we have this movement of breath that starts this integration cycle, so that we feel our emotion, and we maybe have an emotional outburst, and that energy that is triggered from that experience flows and dissipates by the energy, the output that happens, whether that's crying or laughing or shouting or whatever happened in that moment. Now, if we think consciously it's not appropriate to feel, we hold back by holding our breath. So that might be holding back your laughter. We hold it back by holding our breath. We hold back anger by holding our breath. We hold back tears, if we have some upsetting news, if we hold it back, we hold back by holding our breath. So they're very conscious examples, but if our mind, our unconscious mind says it's not appropriate to feel this, it contracts our breathing before we even know it. So to make a bit more sense of this, what I always say, well, the grief for me wasn't really the trauma. Yes, it was a horrendous experience. It's very sad. But it was my inability to process the grief that was linked to my childhood belief, big boys don't cry.
Right.
So I had this input in my body and brain. Teddy bear was called Tough Ted. I grew up in Scotland. I was on a judo mat at 4 years old. I was very much Superman in terms of role models. And big boys didn't cry. And that was held, and that notion of strength I thought was a very good thing. And it stood me quite well throughout my life until this grief experience where I thought we would beat the odds. So again, this kind of desire to win, this desire to have this strength, we'll get through this. And when it didn't go that way, I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to cry. I hadn't cried for years. And it was all held. It was held in my body. It was held as physical tension. So the trauma was held there really, really tight because my brain and body didn't feel safe enough to release that through tears. I could slam a door and I could express it as anger or completely withdraw and not get out of bed. And they were the two expressions of emotion that it felt safe to have, but to actually be vulnerable and be able to emote in a very vulnerable way and cry, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know, it wasn't part of my mind, just didn't know how to go there until I found myself at a breathing class with my mum for Mother's Day. It wasn't something I'd seeked out. It was just something that popped up, and I thought my mum would love this. She's into yoga. And it was a deep form of breathing that allowed me to access this space and release the held tension in my breathing cycle. And along with that came a huge emotional outburst.
It's really interesting what you say there, because that holding pattern it's actually very similar to me. Like when I was growing up, I was a real kind of daddy's girl, and he was always strong, and he would talk about being mentally strong and, you know, not crying, not showing emotion. And so I've always held things in, and it's just super interesting what you say there about the lungs and things, because ultimately when I was suffering with I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and I was having bipolar episodes, that did actually then lead to more lung problems. I'd had quite a few lung problems, and then hospitalization with pneumonia. And it's just really interesting because I think if you don't know how to release things, right, things do stay very much stored in the body. And I noticed that when I've done more somatic style breath work recently, that I also see it's not just the breathing and the kind of experience that you get, that sometimes can be quite hedonistic as well, depending on the type of breath work. But I noticed that my body will move in uncontrollable ways almost, right? A certain area, like my arm or my wrist may very much twitch, or my shoulder may move, almost like it's involuntary, like it's trying to release from the body. What happens there in terms of these somatic experiences that we get?
Yeah, it's part of the release that happens. There's certain exercises that will evoke those even more, like TRE exercises, trauma release exercises that induce this shaking or this movement of the muscle to release the tension that's held in the fascia, like deep tension that's held there. It's a physical contraction that's happened to hold. So though we're saying we're holding on to the emotion, we actually are. You can see that in people's postures where they're holding in tight or how they're holding themselves. So we have all these different micro contractions in our body. And when we go into these breathwork sessions, we're deliberately shifting the chemistry of our body. So we're moving into, it depends on the breathwork session, of course. I know there's lots of different ways to breathe, but the ones you're talking about here, the more somatic release, the more emotional sessions where we're releasing what's held in the body. Exactly that. We're shifting, we're deliberately stressing the body as well. We're using a sympathetic response of the nervous system to evoke this shift and change in the body and breath that has this really powerful effect where we can release held tension in our body and mind. So it's exactly that. We're evoking the breath pattern that's shifting the body, and we'll have this change and move that's happening too. A lot of those practices will have you move your body even beforehand or during the session to allow it to release.
Really interesting. Going back to that experience, which I'm so sorry to hear about, when I was reading it, it evoked so much emotion in me, reading it in your book. So I'm so sorry that happened. And you obviously, when you went to that experience then with your mum, you would have let go of some of this, right? You could cry. How did that make you feel afterwards? Is that when it started to open your eyes to how much you had been holding at that point? What happened?
I was really confused afterwards, to be honest. Breathwork is having its moment. You can go to most yoga studios around the world and find a breathwork class, which is amazing. But this was 10 years ago when that wasn't happening. And so I did find myself in this session. And not only did I had a very cathartic release and felt like the weight of grief was pulled off me, but you mentioned hedonistic, I had a very spiritual experience where I felt that my girlfriend was there holding my hand, saying this is what we were looking for, because we'd been on this journey of cancer, searching for a cure and looking at all the conventional treatments and all the alternative treatments and trying to find the best approach to obviously cure and heal Tiff, which is her name. And here I was in the session having a very emotional experience and bawling my eyes out in a room full of strangers, which was very not something that I'd usually do. And I was also there with my mum, so I felt a bit like sheepish with my mum. And I was then having this very powerful experience where I felt like she was there with me and I could feel her. And I felt like she was there holding my hand, and I just felt her presence. And so much so that I had so many questions, and it ignited this wonder of what just happened. Am I going completely mad? That was one of my first thoughts. Was this just a figment of my imagination? Had someone spiked my drink before going in? Because it had felt like a hallucinogenic experience. And I thought, well, let's try it again. So when I left that session, I felt much lighter. And that was, I guess, my intention going into it when they asked me, what was your intention? Why are you here? And I was kind of there for my mum, but I was also going through grief. So I just like to feel a bit lighter. Again, probably because I felt heavy. I was holding so much tension and I wasn't allowing myself to feel. So went into that session and I did feel much, much lighter having had this release. But I just also was left with a lot of questions. And I'm quite a logical thinker and always have been, whether it's looking at performance or whether it's anything. I like to kind of know why things work. And in that session, it didn't make sense to me how that was happening, how I could just breathe to release this tension in my body and also have this non-physical, non-human experience, something quite magical. And I was just very intrigued to find out a bit more about that.
And what is happening there? Because we do have those experiences, right? And I've had them, and it can almost feel like you've taken some form of drug, right? You're accessing parts, I found, sort of feeling parts, but also parts of your imagination and deep connection, and also an ability to visualize in a way that you can't when you're in a forced state, or in a way that when you're just accessing your conscious mind, right? And you're thinking about something and something you'd like to achieve. It's extremely powerful. What's going on? Is there neurochemicals and things that are leading
Absolutely.
to that state?
There's a lot that's going on in those sessions. Again, I'll just iterate, there's lots of different ways to do breath work, but we're talking about this superventilation, this sort of more powerful form of breathwork session where we can evoke shift and change in the body, and we're driving the sympathetic arm of our nervous system and bouncing between both, because you probably do intermittent pauses or maybe some breath holds, some practices do, etc. as well. So you're tricking the body, you're really working the nervous system, and in many ways you're actually overstimulating the body. Now, there's two ways to transcend our egoic mind, which is what you talked about there, just the conscious part of our everyday thinking. And how do we go beyond that to sort of switch off the default mode network in our brain and access parts of our imagination or parts that we don't ordinarily access in our day-to-day lives? Now, there's two ways to access that state. Under stimulation, which is where we do more traditional meditation, or that might be fasting, or really dropping down the stimulation of our senses, or overstimulating. So we heighten the stimulation in our body, we shift what's happening in the brain waves change dramatically, the body goes into this very powerful shift of state, physically, chemically, and we transcend the everyday thinking mind. So we can have these very powerful experiences. There's still some questioning around what exactly is happening in those moments, whether it is starving our brain of oxygen, because there's a bit of confusion that happens with breath work. People think, I'm breathing more, so I'm breathing more oxygen. But what's actually happening in those sessions is we're breathing more and we're dropping carbon dioxide. So our oxygen saturation doesn't change, but carbon dioxide drops. So we move into a very alkaline state because carbon dioxide is acidic. So we go into this alkaline state. Now our cells, to have this offset of when oxygen is delivered to our cells, I like to think of it as the bus. And it is like a bus because there's 4 oxygen molecules on the bus that go to work to arrive at the cell. Now those 4 oxygen molecules do not get off the bus to go to work to the cell unless the cell has presence of carbon dioxide. So in essence, those 4 seats, oxygen jumps off and the carbon dioxide jumps on, and that goes back to our lungs and we breathe out. Now, if we dilute or breathe quickly in those sessions, carbon dioxide drops dramatically. So oxygen does not get dropped off where it needs to go at the cell. So some theories say, well, actually, we're moving into this unoxygenated cell state, which is stressful for the body. So the body starts to release other chemicals, and there's different hypotheses about what's happening in those states. And that low oxygen environment is DMT being released in the brain, which is creating these otherworldly experiences, which could be the state, could be the case. So much more research really needs to be done to understand exactly what's happening in the brain. There has been brain scans done that show that gamma waves increase dramatically, and the beta and alpha waves actually drop during those sessions, which aligns quite nicely with the stress response, the sympathetic drive. So there's lots of things that are happening in the session, lots of things that are happening in the body. We're in essence overstimulating, we're shifting the chemistry of our body. Our brain then starts to release different chemicals, and we access parts of our brain that we maybe wouldn't be accessing. That dreamlike state, like when we go to sleep at night, that's also to do with this change of chemistry in our brain. So that's what we think's happening, but there needs to be a bit more research done to actually map out exactly what's happening in those moments.
And when you were talking there a little bit, just to unpack some of this, you were talking a little bit about the blood oxygen. I remember doing this a few years ago with a breathwork practitioner. We actually were measuring my blood oxygen with a pulse oximeter. And when I was doing the breath hold, my blood oxygen actually would drop really, it would drop into like the 70%. And then you'd hold that for a while before you then took a breath again. So so blood oxygen is dropping right when you do the holds?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. When I was talking there, I was talking just about the actual breathing pattern.
Okay.
So if you're going into breath holds, obviously we're holding our breath, carbon dioxide rises again and oxygen saturation will drop. So if you are mapping it on a pulse oximeter, when you're breathing, it will stay very stationary, but then when you hold your breath, it will start to drop dramatically. Now, because carbon dioxide is the first desire to breathe, it's the first trigger in our brain to tell us to take a breath. Even though the terms we say feeling breathless or out of breath, it's actually too much carbon dioxide. That's the first desire to breathe. So carbon dioxide increases and triggers us to breathe. If we go into a superventilation practice, whether that is one of these more somatic breathwork, holotropic breathwork, conscious connected breathwork, there's lots of different names for the similar kind of practice. Even Wim Hof breathing, where we're breathing more dynamically, we're dropping carbon dioxide. So then when you go into a breath hold, there's less carbon dioxide. It takes longer for that carbon dioxide to build up. So in the process, we have a lower oxygen saturation. So you can drop your oxygen saturation quite dramatically if you've hyperventilated beforehand or superventilated. I don't really like the term hyperventilation because people associate that with panic attacks,
Yeah.
which in essence is happening, but when
This
we're
is deliberate.
deliberate
Yeah.
ventilation, superventilation, or enhanced ventilation. So yes, exactly that. We're playing around with the balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen. So we're deliberately becoming the alchemist of our own body and changing the chemistry of our body deliberately in those sessions. And that can start to shift how we're responding both mentally and physically.
So it's partly that drop in blood oxygen that's leading to these kind of altered states, is it?
No, no, not necessarily, because the hyperventilation in itself, as I mentioned before, drops carbon dioxide to such a level that the oxygen isn't offset onto the cell.
Right.
So when you're doing intermittent hyperventilation with breath holds, then you're actually going both ways. You're kind of going from one extreme to the other. Some of these other practices, like the practice I first did with my mother when I was grieving, I actually didn't do any breath holds. That particular practice is superventilating, then you have intermittent sound, so you create sound, and then you go back into the practice. It's a practice called transformational breath. So that practice in itself is slightly different. So there's different ways, and I talk about this in my book, and everything that I teach is really about understanding what is the outcome that I'm looking to achieve here. And then you can start to prescribe your own breath pattern and rhythm to match what that is. Now, there might be times that you will want to hold your breath. For when I'm working one-to-one with clients and it is an emotional, something that they want to have an emotional breakthrough on, I tend to not use breath holds at all, because the breath holds is what our bodies are naturally been doing to hold back from feeling. So I avoid those holds. But if it's something more resilience-based or something where we're trying to use stress, like positive stress, to make the body adapt, then I might start using intermittent hyperventilation with some breath holds to make the body more resilient to the stress response and start to trick it in that way. So it really depends on what the outcome is. Any of these sessions could have an emotional release, but sometimes the intent is slightly different depending on what that is we're looking to achieve.
Yeah, I'd like to unpack some of those then, because that's what I love about your app and also the book, right? Is it breaks it down into even not just even chapters, right? But mini exercises that you can do depending on what you want to access. One of the things you do in the beginning is helping someone develop breath awareness and their breathing archetype. It's something that I notice differences in people when I look at their overnight, when I'm coaching clients. I don't just look at their resting heart rate and their HRV, but I also look at their respiratory rate, because that gives me an indication that when they're asleep, how tense are they? And there are some people who are definitely, and some of this could be down, right, to too much carbon dioxide in the room. For example, if they've got the door shut, there's two of them, maybe there's an animal, they've got the window closed, there's, and so they're breathing more rapidly because they haven't got the same kind of CO2 tolerance. But also people who are in like very high performing jobs or entrepreneurs quite often, and they're kind of gunning it or redlining it all day, I find that then they're redlining it quite a bit at night, and their breathing rate can be quite rapid compared to someone who's managing their nervous system a bit better, and then they're just naturally falling back to kind of 12 and a half, 13 breaths a minute when they're sleeping. Can you talk to us first about this breath awareness and how someone might find their breathing archetype, what that is?
Yeah, so the breathing archetype, our breath awareness is the first key, because our breath is telling the story about how our body or mind is perceiving its current reality. So if we are breathing short and shallow in our chest, the pure mechanics of that, it's shorter, it's shallower, we're breathing quicker, and in a kind of very basic nutshell, in-breath switches you on, out-breath switches you off. So in-breath triggers the sympathetic drive, heart rate increases, blood pressure goes up, out-breath switches off, blood pressure drops, and heart rate decreases. So you have this interplay in every breathing cycle, and a play between sympathetic on, parasympathetic off. So we can have these different ratios of breathing to trigger a different response on our nervous system. Now, we all have different experiences. So if we are sat at our desk all day in a stressful situation, then this is a primal response. The tiger's in the room. The tiger's going to kill you. So you have this stress response, fight or flight kicks in, fast breathing so you can leg it to safety. Now, in our modern day world, the high performer, that might be a deadline. That might be an important meeting. And that stressful day, we're very equipped as beings to manage stress. And we can manage bouts of stress, about 20 minutes of stress. But it's when that stressful 20 minutes becomes the stressful day, becomes a stressful week, becomes a stressful year, we get stuck. And what happens is, so we, again, back to what's happening in the body and brain and the chemistry, carbon dioxide, because we're now stressful breathing, let's say our archetype is a stressful chest breather. That could be because of your posture. It could be sat at your desk all day, driving all day. It could even be clothing choice that's causing you to breathe up into your chest. Or you've had an experience that has ungrounded you and you've held tension in your body, and your tension that we're holding on, that emotional tension, is lower down. So if we're a chest dominant breather, for example, that faster rate of breathing, because the mechanics of breathing in and out of our chest, means carbon dioxide drops. Now, carbon dioxide drops, the body becomes a bit more alkaline, and we like to have our pH in a very tight range, 7.35 to 7.45. And when we veer out of that range, then the body does something about it. It prioritizes pH over other things like breathing rate. So if somebody is very stressed and breathing in their chest for a period of time, longer than 20 minutes or prolonged weeks or months, carbon dioxide will drop. The body doesn't like that, so it holds on to acidity instead of going to the toilet and peeing it out. We hold on to acidity in our organs, so our pH, body pH balances, but it balances at this new rate of breathing. So we get stuck in a stressful breathing pattern. Now, that stressful breathing pattern is sending a cue from our breath to our brain about our environment that the tiger's in the room. So we can see that being stuck in a breathing archetype that's a stressful breathing archetype is ultimately telling our brain that there's a threat, and there might not be a threat there. So we have various different breathing archetypes, and the breathing archetypes are just where our breath is flowing, or more accurately, where our breath is not flowing as well. So I mentioned the chest breather, which kind of is what it says on the tin. It's breathing up into our chest, shorter, shallower breaths, the same breath that you breathe when you have a bit of a shock and a fright. And it's that prolonged breathing archetype. The next is a reverse breather. The reverse breather looks a bit like a chest breather, but when they breathe in, their stomach moves back towards their spine and their chest expands. And when they breathe out, it collapses down again. So in essence, instead of their diaphragm contracting and their belly rising and then their chest opening up, they're doing it in reverse pattern. Now, because their primary source of movement, their breath, is back to front, this can create a lot of confusion in the mind. They might be forgetful, and it's also a stress pattern. So there's different attributes and different almost traits of people, depending on their breathing archetype, that will trigger how they're interacting with the world. We have the collapsed breather. Now, the collapsed breather is again a stressful response. There's a lot of posture involved when our shoulders are hunched, and we probably see these people just walking down the street. Breathing is collapsed, their shoulders are hunched, they're not getting the secondary breath into the chest, and their diaphragm's moving, but they can feel exhausted, and they're not opening their heart space, their emotional center, so they might be a bit more pessimistic. There's different
I was going to say, it's hard to be positive in that collapsed position, right? Because your heart's not open, you're not.
Exactly. Yeah. We have the frozen breather. The frozen breather is, imagine how you breathe when it's freezing cold outside. It's like everything is constricted. So we're just not getting this flow of breath into our body that is optimized for our well-being. So it becomes much slower, maybe more sporadic in terms when we start mapping the breathing rate and rhythm. It's much more sporadic. You have the breath grabber, which is the opposite side of the scale. That's that person that's jumping in conversations and they breathe really quickly and they chat really quickly and they're hyperventilating because they're trying to get a point across, so they get excited. I sometimes fall into that trap too when we do get excited. So there'll be times that it's not just like I'm stuck in this archetype. There'll be times throughout our life that we might bounce, even in a day, that we'll maybe jump between different archetypes. And it's about identifying those archetypes and noticing when we're doing it. And sometimes it might be the optimal pattern to be in. i.e. if the tiger's chasing us,
Mm.
or we are feeling excited and we want to say something. But if we're stuck in that as a archetype every single day, then it's not effective for our breathing. And then I do mention in the book, I mentioned the perfect breather as an archetype as well, which is a bit of an enigma, because we all have experiences that are going to impact our breathing. And I think that's part of life. We all have experiences where our breath isn't optimal in those states. But generally speaking, the perfect breather is using the diaphragm and allowing that secondary expansion to the chest. I have missed one as well, which I just remembered now,
Go on then.
is the breath controller. Now, the breath controller is a harder one to spot, and it's because they're controlling their breath. And when we're controlling our breath, we're controlling this life force moving in and out of our body. So on one hand, the breath controller, I was a breath controller because big boys don't cry, so I had it all together. I knew exactly, logical, I mentioned as well, like if I do this, I can do this and I can get an outcome. I studied maths at university, so it was like this plus this equals this. And I lived my life that way. And what that created was a rigidity in my breathing cycle, mainly on the out breath. So I'm controlling my in breath, and on a kind of unconscious way, that's us saying, I'm here. I'm taking this next breath into this moment. So we're choosing to be alive. The out breath is letting go and surrendering and just trusting. And you'll find that the breath controllers aren't trusting in life. They're not fully trusting. And practices like breath control practices like yoga, amazing. But you get a lot of yogis get really good at breath control, that they find it hard to let go of control. And when we're not letting go of control, we're not trusting. We're not having this full freedom in our human experience. And that was certainly the case for me. So that is the other archetype there. It's a little bit trickier to spot, but I see it a lot, especially when I do workshops and I get somebody out the front and I do a demo on them. Often someone, because the breath controller is probably the first person to put their hand up, go, oh, I'll check this. I want to know if I'm doing it right. So even that archetype in themselves, they'll come out the front and then I'm like, oh, it's a breath controller, which is often the case in those sessions.
It's really interesting, especially what you're saying there around the psychology of it, right? Because the way that you're breathing is, as you say, is communicating lifetime with your brain and telling you whether it's safe, whether you feel out of control, whether you can let go, which I guess brings us into the manifestation realm, because you might decide that you have a goal in mind that you want to achieve. But often when we set out on that journey, fear and doubt comes in, as it does, right? And it's our job to kind of feel that fear and move through it and pursue the goal anyway. But if we're breathing in one of these ways, then our physiology may constantly be feeding back, right? That it's unsafe. That can be actually quite difficult then. How do you see that showing up with clients and program members and people that you work with?
Yeah, no, we'll a little backtrack. Thinking is happening in our mind. Feeling happens in our body. And our feeling is triggered by a breathing cycle, a breathing rhythm. So when we are laughing, our breath moves like this. When we're crying, it's quite similar but different. When we're, generally speaking, when we're feeling joy, when we're feeling love, when we're feeling excitement, our breath expands and we have more of expansion in our breathing cycle. When we're feeling fear, when we're feeling doubt, when we're feeling shame, when we're feeling guilt, we start to contract our breathing. So we have this sort of open expansion on our positive side of emotions and a more of a contraction on our negative side. So that's happening in our breathing. So thinking happening in the mind, feeling happening in your body, driven by a breathing pattern. When thinking and feeling match, that creates the state of being that we experience. So it's a two-way street between thinking and feeling. So that state of being loop might be, let's say, anxiety. You're thinking something, an anxious thought or a worry, or it sends a signal to our body. Our body then responds with a breathing pattern, short, shallow breath, and the loop is there. So thinking and feeling match. State of being is anxiety. So to break the loop of what those feelings are, we can either work with the mind or we can work with the breath. We change our breathing pattern. We're going to change the signal, exactly what you said, change the signal, the cue from our body to our brain about what's happening. So even if we're thinking the anxious thought, if we change our breathing rhythm to a very calming breathing rhythm, the brain goes, oh, it's not what I thought, because the breath is telling me something different. So in essence, we can start to hack our breathing rhythms to trigger our brain. And then when we start to use conscious cues like visualization, we can have a really, really effective toolkit to make monumental shifts, whether that's performance or any area that we want to work on. You mentioned fear. Again, if we are stuck in a fear-based breathing pattern, absolutely the first thing to do is move out of that archetype and move into a relaxed, open-flowing breath pattern. And then start working with the mental cues through visualization, through some other even words and affirmations, and moving into that space to start the mental cues that are sending the signal down to the breath, and then match the breathing rhythm and pattern with something that's very expansive and open, so that we can actually shift the chemistry on our body to be more conducive, to align with what we're truly trying to manifest or visualize.
I wonder if we could do this in a kind of, I'm going to give you a situation because this is self-talk, right? And maybe you can comment on, because I know it's something that many people come up against and will struggle with. And I'll tell you how I deal with it. And then you can maybe advise like how would be the best way to do it and give our audience advice on it. So a common thing is you're going to go and speak publicly, whether that's a presentation at work. For me, it's when I'm going to deliver a keynote on stage and the body starts to get ready, right? So there's anticipation. What I learned from Kelly McGonigal was that they had done research, and the way that you anticipate that determines, I guess, to a degree, your performance on stage and how you handle it. So if you kind of go with that feeling in the body and say, oh my God, I'm really nervous, I'm about to go up, it's different than if you start conditioning it and saying, this is my body getting ready to do something big, and it's excitement. It feels the same way. I'm about to go and deliver something that can really help a lot of people, and this is great. So when I use that, because I learned that from, I think I had a TED Talk or something like that. So as I start to feel those nerves build, I will then go, this is good, because this is actually priming my state, because now I'm going to be in quite an activated, switched on. No one wants to be so relaxed to you that you're like, you're not energizing the audience. And so I kind of talk to myself like that. And then I bring in the breath. So this may be completely the wrong order, where I go, okay, now just like slow the breathing down so that I can access that more unified state where I feel like a connection with my audience as I go out there. So I'm kind of, I guess the order is I feel it in the body first, then I communicate with the mind, put it through a positive lens, and then I come back to the breath and try to regulate that. And generally that seems to work for me, because I now go on in a calm but focused state, ready to kind of deliver. I'm probably doing this all wrong. So how would you like, because I think this is something people come up against a lot, right? And they don't want that voice in their head telling them that, you know, what if this goes wrong? Or what if I don't do well and all that? What's the best way in the moment to change this?
Yeah, and what you're doing is perfect. It's really, really great. Depending on the person. I mean, you're doing that a lot.
Yeah.
So you found this rhythm, you found this formula that works really well for you. Funnily enough, public speaking is a bigger phobia than death.
Yeah, I'd heard that.
Which you would rather die than actually speak publicly. And I can relate. It was something that I avoided my whole life. I was petrified of public speaking. I had a typical experience at high school where I froze and people mocked me, and everyone always said I was a very confident person, but when it got on a stage to speak, I would freeze completely, my hands would clam up, and I would avoid it like anything. So it's something I had to work with myself, because I was all of a sudden had something to say. And I was like, I have something to say, but I don't, and it would annoy me that I could speak one-to-one with somebody fine, but if it was in front of a group, I couldn't do it. So you mentioned one thing, feeling what's there. Now, that is really, really key. Something I was taught, and I went to this public speaking training, and got there, and I was just like, I just need to get rid of the nerves. This is like pre-breathwork stuff as well. I just need to get rid of the nerves, get rid of my nerves. and it was ran by actors. And the guy said, well, you'll never get rid of the nerves. And I was like, I want my money back. This is ridiculous. He said, you just got to take your knocking knees on stage. That's what he said. And it was the same what you were saying. It's about accessing, right, the feeling, well, this is part of it. Okay, I can work with this. As long as we can not move so far into that fight or flight response that then our brain shuts off and we can't access the executive function of our brain and we completely freeze on stage. We want to avoid that part for sure. So it's understanding those feelings that are coming up. Oh, I can notice those feelings. Where do I feel them in my body? This is okay. This is preparation. I like how you talk about excitement. It can be that as well. I'm just preparing because this means a lot to me. And then from that moment, then switching to a breathing pattern. Now, the breathing pattern, if it's stress response, we can calm our nerves by slowing our breath down. So the thinking and feeling where we can send a signal from our breath to our brain that we're feeling calm. So something like in for 4, hold for 4, out for 8. Now, you said you don't want to feel too calm on stage or too relaxed, but in that moment you wouldn't, because you've got the tug of war happening between your thoughts, thinking the stressful thoughts, the tiger's in the room, oh my God, all those people are out there, you're going to mess up. That part of ourself, for years I used to call it the inner bitch, but I've softened my approach because it's just part of you that's trying to keep you safe. So it's just part of you, and even naming it can be helpful for some people as well, like naming that part of you. Oh, it's okay, we're going to go on stage together and we're going to do this together. And calming that response down. So we've got this part that's piping up saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. That's triggering the physical response. But then you can use your breath to send a signal back to your brain so you know it's all under control. So we're in essence working with this scared part of ourselves, this fearful part, and there can be excitement as well. So the excitement is almost your brain that you're doing the breath work saying, no, it's okay. We'll go together. This is exciting. And we're taking it by the hand and taking it on stage. So it's really exactly what you said, embodying the feeling that you're noticing. How am I feeling? What's going on? This is completely normal. I still get it all the time. And I've done lots of things as well. And it's part of that preparation. And then matching your breathing pattern with how you want your nervous system to respond. Now, it might be the calm 4-4-8, very calming breath, just to find that balance again between the thoughts and the nervous system and the breath.
Can I ask you on that one why you put a breath hold in? Why you didn't go 4 in and then 8 out? What does the hold do?
The hold just shifts carbon dioxide again. You just have that slight increase in carbon dioxide on the hold. And
which will alkalize your state.
Yeah. No, actually, no. It does the opposite.
The opposite.
It finds balance because you've been breathing faster, more no doubt, or just holding your breath. Then it depends which way of the spectrum you've gone. If you've been breathing quicker because you're stressed, then carbon dioxide drops. The hold will actually balance that out again. Create more acidity in the body. But then we release it on the breath out anyway. That rhythm works really well. If you're then maybe a bit more used to it and you think, oh, this is not my first rodeo, it's not just a one-off best man speech or something where you've got this real fear attached to the outcome. Maybe it's something that you're doing for work, and every week you've got the Monday meeting that you're just dreading every week that you have to present, or maybe you have a board meeting once a month. And I do work with a lot of professionals at quite a high level that are exactly this, like scared of public speaking at board level, and they have to do it for their job. So it's once you get to that stage where you've kind of got that first hurdle over of like, I can do this, I can take the edge off with my breath work, using some preparation before that as well. Understand what's your breathing archetype, because if you just already stress, you already humming at this high state of stress, can you just shift everything through a deliberate daily practice to make sure you're at this level that's more conducive to feeling calm? Then when the stress response kicks in, you're not sort of overloading the body straight away. You're able to manage it with maybe a 4-4-8 breath. As you move down the line, you might be like, oh, well, actually, you could change that breath rhythm to a box breathing rhythm or to something else that is maybe more energizing. You look at someone like Tony Robbins, he gets on stage and he does fast before he goes.
Yeah, he pumps it, right? With arms up like this.
Breath. He jumps on a trampoline. Like he's doing a very fast breathing pattern because he wants to get on stage and he wants his energy to match So he uses a breath rhythm that's going to pump his energy. So when he gets on stage and the music's pumping, he's there. And I sometimes do that with artists, music artists or DJs that want to live a less toxic life and not sort of drink and take other drugs or anything before they play. And they want to get themselves in a state so they can match the crowd at a level. So it really depends where we are on that spectrum of speaking and how we want to get up on their stage and how do we want to show ourselves. If it's that petrified state, then feeling into the feelings, allowing those feelings to come up. It's okay, exactly what you're doing. It's a really great toolkit you've got there. Feeling what's coming up, saying, well, this is part of me, we're going to do it. This is exciting. We can do this together. It's a different part of your body. Calm your nervous system by slowing your breath down, and then get on stage, and you'll probably have this little adrenaline push anyway, and start the talk or the speech or the keynote.
Yeah, super, super helpful that. You talked about Tony Robbins there. He really pumps up his breath before he goes on. In fact, he talks about when you're looking at affirmations, he does them with that stimulating breathwork practice, right? And he calls them incantations, because when you're putting the breath behind it and that energy, he feels like it's creating more movement, I guess, right, towards what you want.
Well, it's exactly what we're doing. We're working with the mind, the thought of the mind through the words.
Yeah.
Which is triggering our body, and then we're controlling our breath in the same moment, which is then triggering the mind. So if we're using those, it's very powerful. That's what we do in our visualization practice.
Right.
So using our breath is stimulating the body and telling the mind. And then the mind, we're using our mind through conscious affirmation or conscious direction to send a signal back to the body. So we're creating this perfect suit for our body to go into this peak state of whatever breathing pattern. And that might be the other way. We're kind of talking about the energy, but that might be just to really calm yourself. You might be saying very calm words. I'm safe. It's okay. I've got this. I choose calm and ease while you're doing a very calm breathing pattern. And that's creating this calm response in the body and mind. Or it can be the other side where we really want to pump ourselves up and believe in ourselves and create a lot of energy and action.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I mean, you're doing this 21 visualization, right? At the day visualization at the time of recording that I'm doing at the moment. How often do you run that as a program within your app?
We run different sessions. This is a live session. We do we're building a lots of different content for the app. We're just going to get started, which is amazing. So we've got the resilience challenge in there that's pre-recorded, but right now we're doing a live vision reboot, we've called it, because we always do a sort of visualization full month of January when everyone's starting the year and they're wanting to sort of set the intentions for the year ahead. We found it a very positive time. We're also in winter, so we can go inwards as opposed to having to push action. It's more about going inwards and really aligning our thoughts, energy, and action with what we want. So we do the more visualization in January, and now we're doing it in June as a vision reboot, which is halfway through the year, because you often find that things start to move and flow, and you might have had these big plans in January, and then you get to midpoint, and so much has happened, but we might have veered off course of the things that really matter for us. And that kind of vision reboot, coming back to understand, well, what were my goals this year? Are they still aligned? Am I still in alignment with those? Have my goals shifted and changed? And how can I reboot this whole process? So we've done it in January, and we're doing it at midway point as well. These are all available in catch up on the app. So even if you aren't doing these live, they're all saved within the app, so you can go back and check out different sessions. We also did other sessions live as well. We did a spring clean in March, which is more physical. We did the breath work, but we're also we did a cleanse through that program as well. So it's finding ways to optimize our body and mind and everyday being.
I love that. I think summer, excuse me, is such a good time for a reset because everyone comes back then with renewed energy in September. I want to just track back to something you mentioned earlier about the default mode network, right? Which is kind of going on in the background in its resting state. And I think that this is really important because it can either be kind of idling with worries and fears, or that sense of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, or I can't do this. Or it could be idling, like if we think back to the days before smartphones, when people would just sit and daydream to music or look out the car window, right? Where it's almost like a world of possibility. Do you think that by having a daily practice of breath work or visualization or combination of the two, you can then powerfully start to reset what the default network is doing when you're unconscious of what it's doing, so that in its natural resting state, it's moving more to positivity than it is to complaining or thinking it's not going to happen or you're not worthy or whatever it is?
It's a really great point. And I talk about these kind of emotional spirals that we go into. And it's when we stop and pause and have those daydreams, which way is our brain spiraling? We're usually going one way or the other. And is it the doubt, the fear, the anxieties, the stress, the worry? Or is it this realm of possibility, the excitement, the daydreaming? And we don't give ourselves enough space in our daily lives nowadays. And you mentioned smartphones. I mean, it's bizarre that we once didn't have smartphones because they're so ingrained in our everyday lives. And we never take a break. People go to the toilet and they're sitting scrolling on the toilet on their phone. Or people just, the minute you stand at a bus stop and you have a moment to yourself, the first thing we do is, instead of allowing ourselves to daydream or think or have those spaces, pockets of thinking time, we tend to be on our phone and we become reactive to whatever we're watching or seeing or scrolling through, whether it's news pages or social media or all these different things that are sort of competing for our attention. So I think there's absolutely creating a deliberate space for daily practice is paramount for your mental health, 100%. And I like to do that in the morning, have my morning practice. That's where we do our morning sessions on the app live. But creating space, so we're using the breath, which is the doing mind, but then creating space in this visualization to daydream, to wonder, to allow the brain just to flow. But we're working with these positive affirmations and positive thoughts and the positive breath pattern that will allow that space to have this more positive spiral of thoughts. We are repeating our thoughts all the time. So once 95% of thoughts are repeated. For most people, I think it's 80% of thought is negative because our body's always looking out for the tigers and bears. But it means that mostly we're kind of already swimming upstream for negative rumination. So if we can start to shift some of those thoughts into thinking about the possibilities, the amazing things that could happen, and shifting it, or using gratitude as a tool as well to help jump into that upward spiral, being grateful even when you're having those moments of rumination or doom and gloom or feeling sad and upset, then jumping, well, what am I grateful for? What are the good things in my life right now? And that is a really great tool to jump over to this more positive space where we can start to daydream and start to use the default model network, as you said, in this more positive light.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's super powerful, because I think just for people to be able to A, create the space, right, and then B, change the way that behavior is happening. Because once we get in a loop, right, or some kind of spiral, it can be difficult to break. Last kind of thing I wanted to speak to you about, because I would encourage people to go and play with the app, get the book. Actually, just there's so many. I'm looking like there's 40 exercises, right? So you can pick from a menu of things that you want to do as well with the book, and it's got many of the things we're talking about, like the breath pump, the box breathing. What are some practices, before you go, that we could just touch on that people are familiar with, that they could begin to use to create different states? So I'm thinking, like you mentioned there, the Navy SEAL style box breathing. To me, that seems to be creating a state of activation, but calm at the same time. Would that be right? That's what's happening there.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, in-breath, sort of very basic. If we think in-breath switches on, out-breath switches off. So we're breathing more and faster. We're going to be activating. We're breathing more out. So longer out breath, we're going to be calming, roughly speaking. So something like box breathing, where we have equal in-breaths and out-breaths, but we also have the breath hold. So box breathing is if you think of a box, you breathe in for a certain amount of time, let's say 4 count, you hold for 4, you breathe out for 4, and you hold for 4. So that is, we're on and off in equal measure, and we have these holds either side that are stimulating as well. So it's a very great tool for both focus, relaxation, and activation all at once. And the research on it is it helps because your in-breath switches you on, your heart rate goes up, out-breath switches you off, heart rate goes down. You actually increase heart rate variability by doing something like box breathing, which again is this calming response, and it also is linked to a flow state. Some research showed that actually activating flow state, which is this peak state for optimization, or in sport we call it the zone, but the flow state can be mapped when we have this balance. So there's this coherent signal from our heart to our brain. And if our breath is controlling our heart rhythms, then something like box breathing is a really, really good tool to find this state of coherence in the heart rhythms. So yeah, it's activating and calming.
Do you need to do 20 minutes for that does it need to be as long as 20 minutes?
There isn't a lot of research that says how long we need. I think personally, I can do box breathing in a short 5 minutes, and I feel that's energy and flow. Or if I'm feeling quite distracted, I'll do a box breathing rhythm, or even I'll breathe through one nostril and then the other nostril to really focus my mind without using my hands, to really focus on breathing in one nostril for 4 and then out the other nostril for 4, which is quite a challenging task.
That is. But yeah. What, without using your hands?
Without using your hands. You can give it a go if you want. Breathe into your left. And then breathe out to your right.
Oh, yeah.
And what it does is it really forces you to become present. This present moment awareness. We can't really think about much else because it's quite challenging to do. So our rumination of thought disappears. Our mind becomes very focused. And if we're matching that with a 4 in, 4 out rhythm, then it's really nice to just kind of focus the mind and start to access a state of flow. If you're feeling stressed or anxious, or you can't sleep at night, then you want to have a rhythm that's got a nice long drawn out breath. Now I mentioned sort of 4, 4, 8. In the book I call that if in doubt, breathe it out. Because having this long out breath, because again, when we're stressed or feeling panicked, we can't even think straight. So I thought if we make it really easy, if in doubt, breathe it out. Just have a long drawn out breath. And that will slow the heart rate. It will trigger the parasympathetic division of the nervous system. Vagal tone increases. We start to feel relaxed. And the mind might jump in with another thought, but then we can just keep on doing this pattern of rhythm. And that will just start to calm everything down. That's the same for sleep. I think Dr. Wheel's gold standard breath practice, sort of anecdotal, said you could fall asleep in 1 minute if you breathe with a rhythm of 4, 7, 8, which is a very similar pattern. We just got a slightly longer breath hold in the middle. So we can start to map these different ratios of breathing to get the response that we want. You mentioned earlier about mapping people's breathing rates, so to get to the normalized 12, 13 breaths per minute. Research showed that the magic ratio for breathing is actually 5.5 breaths per minute, which is like the optimal state for the human body. Most people don't reach that throughout the day because it's quite a slow pace of breathing. So you might find that you're just practicing doing that as a daily practice. Breathing in for 5 counts, tiny little pauses of 5.5 seconds, but usually happens. And breathe in for 5, breathe out for 5, and you start to hit this peak response of the magic ratio where everything starts to calm and relax. And then if we're feeling exhausted and we want to energize our body, we can use these more dynamic breath patterns. The breath of fire, the move we talked about, Tony Robbins sort of pumping his hands up and down. These more
I love these like stimulating breath patterns. Yeah,
well they're great. They create a quick shift in the body, and we feel awake very quickly. Just like having a double espresso, they should be used sparingly, because the same goes to, we talked at the beginning of this conversation around the sort of dynamic breathwork practices, the more somatic release, the holotropic style breathing, this rhythmic breathing patterns. Again, these are interventions. These are not the way we want to be breathing throughout the day. Sometimes I find that people get so into those practices that then their everyday breathing gets impacted because they've been overstimulating their breath. So ultimately what we want to have is this natural resting breath, slow, diaphragmatic, very light, flowing through the body. And from that base level, then life happens. And we'll have those moments where we feel stressed and the stress peaks, but then we want to come back down to that baseline as quick as we can. So having that sort of grounded baseline, the breathing archetype is as close as a perfect breather as we can get. Using your diaphragm, then secondary muscles open up. It's slow, light, it's deep. It's as slow as we possibly can get in terms of breath per minute. 5.5 would be amazing, but it's very unrealistic in our busy worlds. But getting down
but then doing it occasionally, right? Or like just to bring it down. Yeah, having a daily practice of it. What I mean is you're not breathing like that all day, but you're showing your body how that feels. It tends to then drop your resting breathing rate, I find. In people, yeah.
Yeah, so that's exactly how we can start to use our breath in those different moments. And if you're realizing that, so the way I usually talk about breath work is we have functional breathing, which is reactive. Now, what I mean by that is functional breathing. I'm noticing I'm feeling a certain way and I want to change it. So I'm reacting to how I'm feeling through awareness. I'm feeling anxious. Let's change it. Slow my breath down. I'm feeling distracted. I need to focus. I need to find some flow state. I'm going to change my breath pattern. If you're realizing that you're always anxious or always distracted or always lacking in energy, then these other practices, there might be an underlying reason for that happening. Where are we holding tension in the body? Am I reacting in this certain way because of an experience from my past? I mentioned the tiger in the room. And I often share the example of, well, if a dog comes in a room, one person sees the dog and gets excited. Another person sees the dog and it's like the tiger's come in the room. So we can have the same experience, but very different triggered reaction to what's happening. And that's because for the person that's scared of the dog at 3 years old, maybe a dog nipped their hand, or that's a felt experience, or maybe somebody else said, don't ever go near the dog. So a learned experience. So these felt and learned experiences start to shape the identity and shape how you interact with your world and shape how you're triggered in different interactions and how our stress response is triggered. And a lot of this comes back to childhood, what we've experienced and what we've learned, especially in those early stages when our brain's developing, which I talk about in Breathe In, Breathe Out in my book. But if we are still interacting with our world because of our brain, our filtering in our brain, so we have our RAS system, our reticular activating system in our brain, which is the filter for our reality, because otherwise we'd be too stimulated by all the stimulus around us from everything we see and feel. So we have this filter in our brain, and that filter is based on the inputs that we've created from a younger age, mainly. If in layman's terms, we download the manual on how to operate in our world. And one of the first things that happens in those interactions is a change of breathing pattern. Now, if we get a bit older and realize, well, things aren't really working, maybe I'm running on an old manual. And that's when we realize, well, all that old stuff. And that was my big realization writing my book, was I said, we're all fucked, is what I said. And that wasn't in a bad way. I just realized that we all have experiences because we have to download our manual as a child. And there's some people will have very traumatic and horrendous experiences, and we have this scale of what happens. But then it's when we're older, we need to update what's happening there so that we can shift our interactions and shift what's happening. And our breathing patterns, our breathing practices, like some of these deeper practices, have the ability to go in there and start to change, excite the body, change what's happening in the body and brain, so the brain becomes a bit more malleable, so we can actually change the neural pathways and how we're thinking, feeling, and how we're interacting with the world. So we can reduce some of these fear responses, we can reduce some of these patterns of interaction or how we're playing out our stress response in our everyday life.
I love the way you term it there, because it makes it sound very changeable. I'm running on an old manual. It's almost like you need a software upgrade. When you're using those particular practices to kind of repattern, change things, I'm guessing it's very individual as to how long it takes for someone to create that upgrade.
Absolutely. Yeah, some people, and to be honest, it's actually down to the pattern of breath. Some people's breath patterns can be stubborn. And in the work that I do anyway,
Mm.
because ultimately when I'm working with somebody, whether it's one-to-one or whether it's with a group, I'm trying to get them to go back to this natural resting breath mechanically. That is this perfect breather, which means there's void of tension in that breathing cycle. So I'm watching them breathe and I'm watching the breath flow. Now, if they've got tension in their body, I need to release that physical tension. Now, for some people, it might happen in 5 minutes, as quick as that. For other people, it might happen in 10 sessions, 10-hour sessions.
Right.
So it really depends on how stubborn their breath is, but that's also their ability to feel safe to let go of what that tension is, why they're holding on, why they're holding on for dear life, or why their brain is saying it's not safe to let go of this yet. And that, as you said, that can happen very quickly with some people. It can take a bit longer with others.
I find that I can let go in the moment, but then after I'm away from that experience, the old manuals might start to creep back in. How can we stop that?
Yeah, well, that's our mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's we're creating more stories, and what tends to happen is the breath. We'll have this reset. So in the breathing practice, we have this reset. Usually comes with an emotional release. That might be an anger outburst of somebody that hasn't allowed themselves to feel anger. It could be laughter when somebody's repressed themselves from feeling joy and they're just bursting with laughter. And we're having this emotional movement. The breath, then after they've had this emotional integration, their breath goes back and it's open and flowing. And a bit like going to see a chiropractor who will realign your spine, and then you go and reach something, or you go and do a gym session and maybe do it a bit awkwardly, we're back to where the spine was. So that's why repeated sessions, having a daily practice to come back to resets. You might need this reset, or just your daily practice might be these micro movements that allow it to reset itself over time. And then just being aware of thoughts. Oh, I'm back. You said exactly those words. I'm back thinking in this old manual again. I'm back in the old manual. And that awareness is enough to start making change, because once we have awareness of something, we have a choice. So it becomes a bit of a game. You're like, I'm still doing that. I'm doing it again. And the more we actually catch ourselves doing it, or acting in that way, or reacting or thinking in those patterns, then we can say, well, no, it's time to change. Next time I do it, I'll try it differently. And you might usually catch yourself doing it after it's done. But the more you get used to it, and the more that you're practicing your breath and allowing your body and brain to find this new space, and then rewiring it through, whether it's positive affirmation, whether it's goal setting, whether it's actually just surrounding yourself in the environment that is more conducive to the you that you want to identify with, then we can start to have these positive shifts.
Very, very powerful. It's amazing. I haven't had anyone talk about breathing in quite this way. And I think that's what makes your book so unique, and your app. Please share, Stuart, how can people connect with you, with everything you're doing, and really start integrating this into their own lives?
Yeah, well, all the usual social channels, probably most active on Instagram channel, which is at BreathPod. We have the app, and we've got the book, and everything in between. So the book is Breathe In, Breathe Out, which you can get at most bookstores. And I guess our home hub would be our website, which is breathpod.com. And from the website, you can see the courses, you can access the app, you can access the book, we check out our events that we have. We do retreats as well. So that's probably the home hub for everything we do is the website, breathpod.com.
Breathpod.com. We will link to that in the show notes, and everything else to your Instagram account and the app. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this. I think it also helps that your voice is like, I could just listen to you all day, and your accent is it's very hypnotic for me as well. It's really really lovely to have you on. Thank you so much for coming
on. Thanks so much for having me.
There we go. We went a bit over, but I think that's fine. There was